Good evening, friends. Tonight, we won't be visiting grand battlefields or decoding complex royal decrees. Instead, we'll drift into a much more intimate and perhaps much more peculiar world. The private world of medieval kings at home. We're going to pull back the heavy tapestries and peek into the day-to-day lives of majesty, discovering the strange, the mundane, and the deeply human habits that filled their hours when the crown was, metaphorically at least, set aside. So, find your favorite position for rest. Let your shoulders soften and your jaw unclench. Perhaps you can dim your lights, creating a soft, warm glow in your room, like a single candle flickering in a vast stone chamber. Settle under your blanket and feel its gentle weight, a comforting anchor in the quiet of the night. We are about to begin a long, slow, and meandering journey. There is no need to follow every word. Let them simply wash over you like a gentle stream. If this calm journey helps you unwind, feel free to tap the like button and subscribe for more peaceful nights, but only if it feels right. There is no pressure here. Our only goal is rest now. Let your eyes drift closed. Let the sounds of your world fade away, replaced by the soft hum of the past. Our story begins not with the sound of a trumpet, but with the quiet stirring of a king at dawn. Let us begin in the quietest part of the night, that deep, velvet dark hour, just before the first hint of dawn. The castle is asleep. The great hall is empty, its embers glowing a dull, sleepy orange in the cavernous hearth. The kitchens are silent, the scullery maids and cooks tucked away in their small cots. The guards on the battlements pace slowly, their footsteps a muffled, rhythmic tread on the cold stone, a sound so constant it has become part of the silence itself. But here, in the heart of the royal apartments, in the king's own bedchamber, there is no true silence, and there is no true privacy. Imagine the room. It is not the grand, gilded ballroom you might picture, but a space both opulent and profoundly practical. The walls are thick, solid stone, built to withstand a siege, and they radiate a deep, perpetual chill, a cold that has settled into the very bones of the castle over centuries. You could press your hand to the stone and feel the damp coolness of the earth, a constant reminder of the world outside. These are not merely decorative, they are a vital layer of insulation. Woven with thick woolen threads, they depict scenes of hunts, of mythical beasts, or perhaps a stylized forest thick with deer and boar. In the flickering candlelight, the figures on the tapestries seem to sway and move, their woven eyes watching over the room. The threads are rich with the colors of the age-deep crimsons made from insects. They also catch the dust, and the scent of the room is a complex blend of old wool, beeswax from the sputtering candles, and the faint, ever-present aroma of wood smoke that seems to permeate everything. The floor is not bare stone, but is covered in a thick layer of dried reeds and fragrant herbs. This is a practice known as strewing. The idea was to release a pleasant fragrance, to mask the less pleasant odors of medieval life, and to provide a soft, insulating layer underfoot. It was a constant battle of scents, a fragrant war waged against the realities of a world without modern sanitation. In the winter, they are dry and brittle, their scent more subtle, a ghostly memory of the summer garden. And at the center of this room, dominating the space, is the king's bed. It is a monumental piece of furniture, a room within a room. From a high canopy or tester hang thick, heavy curtains of velvet or brocade, lined with silk or even fur. These are not for show. The cold air, a silent, invisible river, flows around this fabric fortress, but cannot easily penetrate it. Inside this curtained world, the air is still and noticeably warmer, heavy with the scent of the sleeping king and the linen of his bedclothes. The mattress itself is a marvel of its time. For a king, this would be the finest possible filling. Vast quantities of feathers plucked from geese and swans, creating a deep, lumpy, but undeniably luxurious bed. Beneath this, for structure, might be layers of softer straw or horsehair. To lie on such a bed would be to sink into it, enveloped by the rustling, shifting mass of feathers. The sheets are of fine linen, the best available. But even the finest medieval linen has a certain coarseness, a texture to it, that we would find rough today. They are cool to the touch, and smell faintly of the lye soap used to wash them, and the lavender they were stored with. Over the top is a collection of blankets, woolen cloths, and, for the ultimate luxury, a heavy coverlet made of fur, perhaps ermine, with its telltale black-tipped tails, or soft, warm squirrel fur, painstakingly stitched together from dozens of small pelts. The weight of these coverings would be immense, a heavy, secure pressure that pins you to the bed. But the king, you see, is not alone. To imagine a medieval king sleeping in solitary splendor is to misunderstand the very nature of his life. His bedchamber is a surprisingly crowded place. Even at this late hour, several trusted servants, known as grooms of the chamber, are asleep on simple pallets or truckle beds on the floor around the king's grand bed. Their presence is a matter of security and service. Should the king wake in the night, thirsty, he need only whisper, and a hand would appear through the curtains with a cup of watered wine. Should he have a nightmare, common fear, as dreams were often seen as omens or divine messages, there would be someone there to reassure him. These are his most trusted inner circle, men who have been with him for years. Their soft, rhythmic breathing is a constant, living presence in the room, a human shield against the terrors of the night and the deep, profound loneliness of power. One of these servants holds a particularly intimate and vital role. He is known in the later English court. The stool in question was the commode, or portable toilet. It was this groom's duty to assist the king with his most private bodily functions, to monitor his health through his excretions, and to be with him in his most vulnerable moments. Because of this unparalleled intimacy, the groom of the stool became the king's closest confidant. He was the first to see the king in the morning, and the last to see him at night. He controlled access to the king's private chambers, which meant he controlled who got to speak to the king in an informal setting. His pallet on the floor is closer to the king's bed than anyone else's. His sleep is the lightest. His ears always tuned to the slightest stirring from behind the heavy velvet curtains. Let's imagine the first signs of dawn. A faint, gray light begins to seep through the narrow. The light is weak and watery, but it is enough to begin to change the character of the room. The deep shadows soften. The woven figures on the tapestries resolve themselves from lurking shapes into their familiar forms. The single candle that has been left burning all night in a safe corner. Perhaps it is the change in the light, or the distant sound of a rooster crowing from the bailey below. This is the moment the entire room has been waiting for. The soft sound of his movement is a signal. The grooms on the floor begin to wake, not with a sudden start, but with a practiced, quiet efficiency. They are professionals. One groom moves to the window and unlatches the heavy wooden shutters. Another moves to the hearth, where the embers still glow. The groom of the stool is already on his feet. He pulls back the bed curtains just enough to peer inside. "Your Majesty," he might whisper, "the hour is prime." The king groans, a very human sound, the sound of a man who is not yet ready to leave the warmth of his cocoon. He might ask for a moment more, and he would be granted it, but the process has begun. The castle is waking up because the king is waking up. Once he is ready, the ritual of the king's morning begins. It is a slow, deliberate ceremony. First, the groom of the stool would bring the commode, a velvet-padded box with a pewter or ceramic bowl inside. He would assist the king, holding a linen cloth, offering a basin of scented water for him to wash his hands afterward. All of this happens within the relative privacy of the curtained bed. While this is happening, other servants are entering the room. Not a flood of people, not yet, but a select few. The royal barber arrives, a man with a steady hand and a collection of sharp razors, soaps, and warm towels. Shaving was not a daily ritual for all, but for a king who preferred a clean-shaven look, the barber was a key morning figure. Imagine the scraping sound of the razor, the warmth of the towel on the skin, the scent of the almond-based soap. Next comes the physician. He would arrive to inquire after the king's health. He would ask about his sleep, his humors, his general disposition. He might examine the contents of the chamber pot, which the groom of the stool would have discreetly saved, looking for signs of imbalance in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, which were believed to govern the body's health. His recommendations might be simple, perhaps a light breakfast or a walk in the garden later. Or they might be more alarming, a suggestion of bloodletting to correct a surplus of blood, which was thought to cause lethargy or a ruddy complexion. While all this is happening, the king is still in his bed, or perhaps sitting on the edge of it, wearing a simple linen nightshirt. The room is now becoming busier. High-ranking nobles, those with the privilege of the entree, begin to arrive. They stand quietly along the walls, waiting for their moment. To be allowed into the king's bedchamber as he woke was a sign of immense favor. It was here that a quiet word could be had, a petition subtly presented, a rival's influence quietly undermined. The king's waking was not a private act. It was the first political session of the day. He might conduct business from his bedside, granting favors or hearing news while his barber shaved him, or as he sipped his first cup of the day. What would that first cup be? Not coffee or tea, which were unknown in medieval Europe. It was most likely wine. A small cup of watered wine, or perhaps ale, was a standard morning drink for all classes. Water was often untrustworthy, and the mild alcohol content of wine and ale was believed to have cleansing and fortifying properties. For a king, the wine would be of good quality, perhaps a sweet wine like Hippocras, spiced with cinnamon, ginger, and cloves. Imagine the taste of that on a cold morning, sweet, warming, the exotic spices, a jolt to the senses, a taste of wealth and connection to the far-off lands where these precious substances originated. It would be served in a cup of silver, or even gold, cool and heavy in his hand. The process of getting out of bed and dressed was the next stage of the ceremony, and it involved even more people. But for now, let's linger in this strange, transitional moment. The king is awake, but not yet ready to face the world. The room is filled with the low murmur of respectful voices, the crackle of the fire, the scrape of the razor, the clink of a silver cup against a saucer. The air is a mixture of wood smoke, old herbs, scented soap, and the sweet spice of the morning wine. It is a world of incredible intimacy and suffocating publicity. The king is the center of this universe, yet he is never, ever alone. His most personal moments are witnessed, assisted, and recorded by the small army of people whose entire lives and fortunes depend on his. And his first conscious thought of the day is likely not of his family or his own comfort, but of the weight of the kingdom that has been waiting for him just outside his bed curtains since the moment he first stirred in the dark. This morning ritual could take an hour, sometimes two. It was a slow, deliberate ramp-up to the day. There was no sense of rush, no frantic search for keys or a missing shoe. Everything was orchestrated. Each person had their role, their place in the hierarchy that surrounded the royal body. The simple act of waking was transformed into a piece of political theater, a daily reaffirmation of power and status. The men who stood against the tapestried walls, silent and watchful, were not there by accident. Their presence was a carefully calculated map of the court's power structure. The man who handed the king his first sip of wine, the man who held the basin for him to wash, the man who was allowed to speak to him before he had even put on his slippers. These were the men who held real influence. And the king, from the moment he opened his eyes, was a performer on this strange, domestic stage. His every yawn, every grimace, every quiet word was observed and interpreted. The oddest habit of a medieval king, then, was perhaps this, that he had no habits that were truly his own. They all belonged to the crown. They all belonged to the realm. And as the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting longer, brighter shafts of light through the chamber window, the ceremony of waking draws to a close. The physician has made his pronouncements. The barber has finished his work. The first petitions have been heard. The king finally stands, ready to be dressed, ready to move from the semi-private space of the bedchamber to the more public arenas of the chapel, the council chamber, and the great hall. The unprivate chamber has served its purpose. It has launched the king, and by extension, the kingdom, into another day. And as we leave this crowded, scented, and politically charged room, we can almost hear the deep, collective sigh of relief from the court as the king finally emerges, ready for his reign to properly begin. The first, and perhaps most important, part of his day is already over. Now, let your mind wander from the crowded intimacy of the king's bedchamber. Leave behind the scent of wood smoke and morning wine, and let us follow the king as he prepares to face his court. The next great ritual of the morning is getting dressed, an act we consider simple and private, but which, for a medieval monarch, was a public spectacle of power, wealth, and staggering complexity. Let us step into the world of the royal wardrobe, a place less like a modern closet and more like a state treasury, a theater department, and a fortress all in one. The wardrobe was not typically a single room with hanging rails. It was often a suite of rooms, sometimes even a separate tower in the castle, dedicated to the storage, maintenance, and management of the king's vast collection of clothing, jewels, linens, and textiles. The man in charge was the keeper of the wardrobe, a major officer of the state, essentially a cabinet minister whose portfolio was fabric and finery. This was not a frivolous position. In an age before national banks and complex financial instruments, a king's wealth was often tangible. It was in his gold, his silver plate, and, just as importantly, in his clothes. A single royal robe, heavy with gold thread and encrusted with gems, could be worth more than a small village. It was a liquid asset, a symbol of power that could, in a pinch, be pawned or used as collateral to fund a war. So, imagine stepping into the main storage chamber of the wardrobe. The air here is different from the rest of the castle. It is cool and dry, a deliberate effort to prevent mold and mildew. The scent is powerful and distinct, a potent mix of beeswax from the polished wooden chests, cedarwood used to repel moths, and the intense fragrance of dried herbs like lavender, cloves, and orris root, which were packed in small linen bags and tucked amongst the folded garments. It's a clean, spicy, almost ecclesiastical smell, the perfume of preservation. The room is lined with enormous wooden chests, known as coffers. They are bound with iron straps and feature complex locks, not just to prevent theft, but to protect the priceless contents from dust and pests. These are not filled haphazardly. Each coffer is dedicated to a specific type of garment. One might hold the king's shirts and brise the basic linen undergarments of the time. Another, his doublets and pourpoints, the quilted, fitted jackets. That formed the core of a fashionable man's attire. A third might contain his hosen, the brightly colored woolen or silk leggings that were the precursors to modern trousers. And then there are the coffers for the robes of state, the grand ceremonial garments that were the medieval equivalent of a superpower's military might on display. A team of servants, tailors, and clerks works here under the keeper's direction. Let's watch as they prepare the king's outfit for the day. The choice is not made by the king himself, pointing at a hanger. It is a decision informed by the liturgical calendar, the day's planned activities, and the political message he wishes to send. Is it a feast day? He will wear something spectacular. Is he meeting with a foreign ambassador? The outfit must project wealth and power, a subtle form of sartorial intimidation. Is he going hunting? He will require practical, but still regal, riding clothes. Let's say today is a day for holding court, a day of judgment and audience. The master of the robes, a subordinate of the keeper, consults his records. He decides on a long, flowing houppelande, a popular high-status garment of the 14th and 15th centuries. A servant is dispatched to the appropriate coffer. 2 men are needed to lift the heavy lid. As they open it, the scent of lavender and cedar billows out. Inside, nestled in protective linen sheets, lies the garment. It is a magnificent river of fabric, a deep royal blue velvet. Imagine the feel of that velvet. This isn't the thin, synthetic velvet we know today. This is silk velvet, incredibly dense and heavy, with a deep, soft pile that seems to drink the light. Running your hand over it would be like touching moss, but with the weight and coolness of liquid. The blue color is not uniform. It shimmers, appearing almost black in the shadows, and a brilliant sapphire where the light hits it. This color alone is a statement. The finest blues were derived from expensive imported dyes, a clear signal of international trade and immense wealth. The servants lift the hoopyland from the chest with practiced care. It is astonishingly heavy. The sheer amount of fabric is immense, designed to fall in rich, sculpted folds from the shoulder to the floor. The sleeves are a spectacle in themselves. They are enormous, pendulous things, trailing on the ground, their edges cut into ornate patterns, a style known as dagging. This feature, like so many in high fashion, was a pure, unadulterated symbol of status. You could not possibly do any manual labor with sleeves like these. You could barely feed yourself without assistance. They announced to the world, "I am so important, I do not need the use of my hands." But the fabric is just the beginning. The entire garment is embroidered. A team of embroiderers, often skilled women working in a dedicated workshop, would have spent months, perhaps even years, on this one piece. Along the collar and cuffs, and perhaps scattered across the entire surface, are tiny, shimmering seed pearls, painstakingly stitched into patterns. Perhaps the king's personal emblem, like the broom-cod of the Plantagenets, or a stylized falcon, and interspersed with the pearls is gold thread. This wasn't gold-colored cotton, it was actual gold, hammered into incredibly thin strips, then wrapped around a core of silk thread. The garment glitters and winks with every movement, catching the light like a constellation of tiny stars. A robe like this was, quite literally, worth its weight in gold. Now, the other pieces are selected. A fine linen shirt, bleached white, a sign of luxury, as keeping linen white was a constant, difficult task. A pair of hosen, one leg a startling scarlet, and the other the same royal blue as the robe, a fashion known as mi-parti, or party-colored. Hosen required a certain physique to look good, and a well-turned calf was much admired. They were held up by being tied with points, or laces, to the doublet worn over the shirt. The doublet itself is a work of art, made of quilted silk, padded to create a fashionable, broad-chested silhouette, and the shoes, called poulaines or crocows. They are another marvel of impractical fashion, made of soft, dyed leather. Their most notable feature is their long, pointed toe. For a common man, the point might be a few inches long. For a nobleman, it could be 6 inches. For a king, the points could be a foot long, or even longer, so absurdly extended that they had to be stuffed with moss or horsehair to hold their shape, and sometimes even chained with a fine silver chain to a garter at that need, to prevent the wearer from tripping over his own feet. Again, the message was clear. I do not walk far. I do not run. I certainly do not work. I glide. I process. I am carried. With the outfit selected, the components are laid out on a clean linen cloth, ready to be taken to the king. The act of dressing is the next part of the morning's performance. The king stands in his chamber, perhaps having now dismissed the physician and the barber. But the audience of high-ranking courtiers remains. The groom of the stool and the grooms of the chamber are the ones who physically dress the king, but the master of the robes is there to supervise. It is a slow, layered process. First, the clean linen shirt, cool against the skin. Then the brise, the loose linen undershorts. Then the hosen are pulled up, each leg tied carefully to the doublet. This was a tricky process, ensuring they were smooth and wrinkle-free. Then the doublet is slipped on and buttoned or laced up the front. It's tight, restrictive, designed to sculpt the torso. Over this goes the magnificent blue houppelande. The weight of it settles on his shoulders, a familiar, regal burden. The long sleeves are arranged. The final touch is a belt, worn high on the waist for this style of robe. It is not a simple leather strap. It is a masterpiece of the goldsmith's art, made of linked golden plates, each one chased with designs and set with polished gemstones, rubies, sapphires, and large, irregular pearls. The buckle is a heavy, solid gold sculpture in itself, but he is not yet fully dressed. Now come the jewels. A heavy gold chain, its links as thick as a finger, is placed around his neck. On it might hang a personal devotional pendant or a spectacular jewel. Rings are slid onto his fingers, each one heavy with a large, uncut stone. Gemstones were not faceted in the modern style to sparkle. They were typically polished, smooth cabochons, valued for their deep color and supposed mystical properties. A sapphire was thought to promote tranquility, a ruby to protect against poison. These were not just ornaments, they were talismans. Finally, the king might place a hat or circlet on his head. For a day in court, a full crown might be too much, but a smaller golden circlet or a fashionable velvet hat adorned with a jeweled brooch and a single perfect feather from an exotic bird would complete the look. Now, stand back and observe the transformation. The man who woke in a simple nightshirt has vanished. In his place stands a living icon, a figure of almost supernatural splendor. He doesn't just look rich, he looks powerful, otherworldly. The clothes are designed to change the way he moves. The way he stands, he must move slowly, deliberately. The weight of the robe, the restriction of the doublet, the absurdity of the shoeset, all combines to create a regal, gliding posture. He is no longer just a man. He is the embodiment of the kingdom. And what about the smell? He would not use perfume in the way we do, sprayed from a bottle, but he would smell intensely of his wealth. The clothes themselves carry the scent of the wardrobe cedar and lavender. He might have a pomander, a small, perforated ball of silver, or gold on a chain, filled with a solid block of fragrant wax and resin, like ambergris or musk. These were incredibly expensive animal-derived scents. As he walked, the pomander would swing gently, releasing its exotic, heavy perfume, a personal cloud of fragrance that announced his arrival before he was even seen. Consider the oddity of it all. This elaborate, multi-hour ritual was a daily occurrence. The sheer logistics are staggering. Where did all this fabric come from? The wool from England's finest sheep, the silk from Italy or the far-off Byzantine Empire, the gold from deep within the earth, the pearls from the sea, the gems from mines in Asia. His single outfit was a map of the known world, a testament to the reach of his trade networks and his political power. And what of hygiene? These magnificent outer garments were almost never washed. You could not simply toss a gold-embroidered, pearl-encrusted velvet robe into a tub of water. It would be ruined. Cleaning consisted of spot-treating stains, brushing the fabric carefully, and airing it out. The constant use of fragrant herbs and pomanders was not just for pleasure. It was a necessity to keep the garments smelling acceptable. The linen undergarments, the shirt and bras, were washed regularly, They were the disposable layer that protected the priceless outer layers from the body. This is why a clean, white shirt was such a status symbol. It meant you could afford not only the fine linen itself, but the army of laundresses and the vast quantities of soap and firewood required to keep it clean. So the king stands there, ready. He is a walking work of art, a political statement, a mobile treasury. The whispers in the wardrobe are not just from the servants and tailors. They are the whispers of history, of trade, of power, of countless hours of human labor from all corners of the globe, all culminating in this one man, in this one room, on this ordinary morning. The weight on his shoulders is more than just velvet and gold. It is the physical manifestation of his entire kingdom. And now he turns and glides towards the door, his long pointed shoes scuffing softly on the herb-strewn floor. The golden chain on his belt jingling with a faint, musical chime. The court awaits, and as we watch him go, we are left in the quiet, scented air of the wardrobe, amidst the silent coffers that hold a king's fortune and a nation's pride, all folded neatly in lavender and linen. And as we leave the quiet, fragrant stillness of the royal wardrobe, let our senses follow the king through the stone corridors of his castle. The air changes. It grows warmer, louder, and thick with a new collection of smells. We are heading towards the great hall, the social and political heart of the castle, for the main meal of the day. This was not a quiet family dinner. It was the most important public event of the king's daily schedule, a noisy, chaotic, and often bizarre spectacle of consumption and status. Let's pull up a bench in the corner and watch the medieval feast unfold. Asterisk, asterisk. The Great Hall is a vast, cavernous space. Its ceiling soars upwards, supported by massive, dark wooden beams that looked like the ribs of a beached whale. The sheer volume of the room is designed to impress, to make any visitor feel small and insignificant. High on the walls, narrow windows let in stripes of daylight, illuminating a swirling universe of dust motes. The stone walls are again hung with tapestries, but these are grander, depicting epic battles, glorious coronations, or biblical scenes. At one end of the hall is an enormous fireplace, a gaping maw large enough for a man to stand inside, with a whole log, sometimes an entire tree trunk, blazing away. The heat it throws out is immense, but it barely touches the far corners of the room, creating zones of roasting heat and chilly drafts. The floor is paved with stone flags, and like the bedchamber, it is strewn with reeds or rushes. But here, they are less fragrant and more functional. They are there to soak up spills, discarded bones, and whatever else falls from the tables. By the end of a feast, the floor would be a fragrant, sodden mess. The noise is almost overwhelming. It's a cacophony of human life, the chatter and laughter of hundreds of courtiers, the shouts of servants, the clatter of pewter plates and cups, the whining and barking of dogs under the tables, and, providing a constant soundtrack, the music of minstrels playing lutes, flutes, and viols from a dedicated gallery high above the floor. The layout of the room is a rigid map of the social hierarchy. At the far end, on a raised platform or dais, is the high table. This is where the king sits, flanked by his most important guests, visiting nobles, powerful bishops, his immediate family. They are literally and figuratively above everyone else. Below them, running the length of the hall, are long, rough, trestle tables where the rest of the court sits, their proximity to the high table a precise indicator of their rank. The farther you are from the king, the less important you are. The people at the very end of the hall, near the doors, are the lowest ranking members of the household. Let's focus on the king at the high table. He is not eating from a ceramic plate like we would. His plate is a trencher, a thick, square slab of stale bread, about 4 days old, that has been cut for this purpose. It is dense and hard, designed to absorb the juices of the food placed upon it. At the end of the meal, the gravy-soaked trencher would not be eaten by the king. It would be collected and given as alms to the poor waiting at the castle gates, a form of institutionalized charity. The king eats with his fingers and a personal knife. Forks were known, but were considered an effeminate and strange Italian novelty. The knife was for cutting meat and for spearing chunks to bring to the mouth. Spoons were used for soups and pottages. For everything else, God gave you hands. Small bowls of scented water and linen towels, called ewers and basins, would be brought around frequently by servants for rinsing greasy fingers between courses and the food. The food is a parade of overwhelming abundance. The medieval palate, especially the aristocratic one, was not subtle. They loved strong, heavily spiced flavors. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, ginger, nutmeg, mace, and especially pepper were the ultimate status symbols. They were astronomically expensive, imported over vast distances from the East, and using them lavishly was the culinary equivalent of wearing a jeweled robe. A dish might be so laden with pepper and ginger that it would be almost inedible to a modern palate, but to a medieval diner, it screamed wealth. But before the first course even arrives, there is a crucial and deeply paranoid ritual. The royal taster. This was a real and necessary position. Political assassination by poison was a genuine threat. Several high-ranking servants, the server would publicly taste the king's food and drink before he did. Small piece of every dish would be placed on a special plate, and the server would eat it in full view of the court. The cupbearer would pour a little of the king's wine into the lid of the silver ewer and drink it down. They would then have to wait a moment to ensure they didn't drop dead on the spot. Only then would the king be served. Imagine the pressure of that job, where every meal carried a small but real risk of death. Yet, it was a position of immense honor, signifying absolute trust. Some kings even used a serpent's tongue, likely a prehistoric shark's tooth, or a piece of unicorn horn narwhal tusk, which were believed to sweat or change color in the presence of poison. Now the first course begins. A procession of servants, moving in a synchronized, theatrical line, emerges from the kitchens. They carry huge silver or pewter platters. This course might consist of various pottages, thick, savory stews of meat and vegetables, but these are just the opening act. The centerpiece of a truly royal feast was often what was known as a subtlety or subtlety. These were incredible, edible sculptures designed to amaze and delight the guests between courses. A subtlety might be a castle made of marzipan and pastry, complete with tiny banners. Or it could be a scene from mythology or history, sculpted from jellies and sugar paste. But the most famous subtleties involved birds. A swan or a peacock would be carefully skinned, its meat roasted, and then the cooked meat would be reinserted into its own skin and feathers, propped up on a platter to look as if it were still alive. Sometimes, a piece of camphor soaked in alcohol would be placed in its beak and lit, so it appeared to be breathing fire. Imagine the spectacle: a servant carrying a full-sized swan, feathers gleaming, seemingly sailing across the platter, wreathed in flame. It was pure theater. The taste of peacock, by all accounts, is dry and unpleasant. It wasn't about the taste. It was about the audacity of serving something so beautiful and rare. Let's imagine the king biting into a piece of roasted boar. It would be gamey, rich, and likely covered in a thick, sweet and sour sauce. A popular sauce was egg reduce, a mix of vinegar and sugar or honey, heavily spiced. The combination of savory meat with intensely sweet and spicy flavors was highly fashionable. They loved to blur the lines between sweet and savory. A meat pie might be filled not only with venison, but with dates, raisins, and prunes, and spiced with cinnamon and cloves. It would taste more like a modern Christmas mince pie than a savory dinner. Consider the colors. They loved brightly colored food. A sauce might be dyed a vivid yellow with saffron, a brilliant green with parsley or spinach juice, or even a startling red or purple using the juice of sandalwood or alkanet root. A bland-looking dish was a poor dish. A feast was a painter's palette, a vibrant, sometimes garish, display. They even had a dish called blank manger, a pottage of shredded chicken, rice, and almond milk, which was valued for its pure, startling whiteness. And what did the king drink with all this wine, and lots of it? Mostly red wine, claret, from Gascony in France. It was younger and lighter than the red wines we are used to, and it was often drunk watered down. But for a special occasion, there would be sweet, heavy wines from the Mediterranean, or the spiced wine, Hippocras, which was served warm and was considered a digestive aid. Beer and ale were also drunk in vast quantities, especially by those at the lower tables. The sheer amount of alcohol consumed at one of these feasts is hard to comprehend. It was a key part of the social lubrication and the general sense of celebratory abundance. Between the grand courses, there might be entertainment. The court jester, a figure we often imagine as a simple clown, was often a sharp-witted social commentator, the only person allowed to speak truth to the king, albeit cloaked in humor. He might wander the hall, telling jokes, performing acrobatics, or gently mocking the more pompous courtiers. Acrobats, jugglers, and musicians would perform. A poet might recite a long, epic romance. The feast was not just a meal. It was an all-day, multi-sensory experience. Let's focus on one particularly odd delicacy. At certain times of the year, particularly during Lent, when red meat was forbidden, fish became the star. But they didn't just eat cod and herring. The aristocratic table featured beaver because it had a flat, scaly tail and lived in the water. Learned theologians had classified the beaver as a type of fish, making it permissible Lenten eating. The tail, being fatty, was considered a particular delicacy. Porpoises and dolphins, also being aquatic mammals, were sometimes on the menu as well, classified as fish for culinary and religious convenience. The mind boggles at the logic, but it was a perfect example of bending the rules to suit the palate. Another bizarre creation was the cockatrice. This was a true Frankenstein's monster of the medieval kitchen. A cook would take the front half of a piglet and the back half of a large chicken or capon and sew them together. The resulting creature would be roasted, glazed, and served up on a platter, sometimes even fitted with a paper crown. It was a culinary joke, a testament to the skill and morbid humor of the royal cook, designed to provoke gasps and laughter from the diners. Can you imagine being served half a pig attached to half a chicken? It's the sort of thing that speaks to a sense of playful grotesquerie, a love of the surprising and the unnatural. Asterisk. As the meal progresses, the atmosphere in the hall becomes looser, louder, and more chaotic. The dogs under the table fight over fallen scraps. The courtiers, flushed with wine, grow boisterous. The king, at the high table, presides over it all. He might talk politics with the bishop to his right, or share a joke with the duchess to his left. He is on display, his every action noted. Does he favor a certain dish? The cooks will make it again. Does he offer a piece of meat from his own trencher to a courtier? It is a sign of immense favor. The entire meal is a constant negotiation and reaffirmation of relationships and power. And finally, after hours of eating and drinking, the last course is served. This might be wafers thin, crisp, unleavened biscuits, a bit like a modern ice cream cone without the ice cream, served with cheese and spiced wine. Or it might be small, sweet treats made from sugar and fruit pastes, the ancestors of modern candy. Sugar was another incredible luxury, often sold by the ounce in apothecaries' shops and considered a spice. When the king is finished, he raises a hand. The meal is over. The servants clear the high table, collecting the silver platters and golden goblets. The uneaten food and the soaked trenchers are gathered for the poor. The king rises, and the entire hall falls silent and rises with him. He might retire to his private chambers for a nap, a very necessary activity after such a feast, or he might move to another room for games, like chess, or to listen to more private musical performances. As he leaves the great hall, a wave of activity follows. The trestle tables are dismantled and stacked against the walls, clearing the floor. The servants begin the monumental task of cleaning up, sweeping the soiled rushes into piles, their scent now a thick, cloying mixture of stale wine, grease, and old herbs. The great hall, the stage for this magnificent performance of consumption, is reset for the next act in the life of the castle. And we are left with the lingering taste of cinnamon and ginger, the ghost of a peacock's fiery breath, and the unsettling image of a half-pig, half-chicken creature, a testament to a time when a king's dinner was a theater of the bizarre, a feast of peacocks and paranoia. Let us now retreat from the boisterous, food-laden atmosphere of the great hall. Let the echoes of the minstrel's music fade, and the rich, heavy scent of roasted meats and spices dissolve into the cool stone air of the corridors. Our journey now takes us to one of the most misunderstood aspects of medieval royal life: hygiene and health. We often imagine this period as one of unrelenting filth, but for a king, the reality was more complex, a strange mixture of lavish ritual, profound medical misunderstanding, and a constant battle against the invisible world of smells and sickness. Let's push open the door to the king's bathhouse and explore the world of royal wellness. First, let's address the bath itself. It's a common myth that medieval people never bathed. They did, but bathing was a different affair from our quick daily shower. For a king, a bath was an event, a luxurious pastime, and sometimes even a social occasion. It wasn't necessarily a daily habit, but it might be taken weekly, or whenever the king felt the need to relax and refresh himself. Large castles often had dedicated bathhouses, or a portable tub could be set up in the king's private chambers. Imagine the scene. Servants' hall in a large, round wooden tub, like a giant, shallow barrel. It is placed in the king's chamber, likely near the fireplace for warmth. Then begins the laborious process of filling it. Bucket after bucket of water, heated over a fire, in the kitchens, is carried up and poured into the tub until it is full. This alone was a huge expenditure of labor and firewood. While the water is being heated, the king's personal attendants prepare the bath. They might add handfuls of salt, which was believed to have purifying properties. More importantly, they would add fragrant herbs. Large bunches of rosemary, lavender, chamomile, and mint would be steeped in the hot water, releasing their essential oils and creating a fragrant, therapeutic steam that filled the room. The scent would be clean, green, and powerful, a stark contrast to the smoky, animal smells of the rest of the castle. The king would disrobe and step into the tub to prevent splinters from the wooden staves. A linen sheet might be laid down. Inside the tub first, the water is hot and deeply aromatic. The steam wreathes around him. This was not a time for solitude. Attendants would be on hand to assist him. One might use a soft cloth and a block of soap to wash his back. Medieval soap was made from animal fat like tallow and wood ash lye, and could be quite harsh, but a king's soap would be of a finer quality, perhaps with olive oil as a base, and scented with more of those expensive herbs. Another attendant might be tasked with pouring pitcher after pitcher of warm, clean water over the king's head to rinse his hair. The bath was a place of relaxation. Sometimes a small wooden board would be placed across the tub to act as a table. On it could be set a goblet of wine and a plate of fruit or other light snacks. A king could soak for an hour or more, sipping wine, relaxing in the scented steam. It was also a place where he could conduct business in an informal setting. Much like the bedchamber, being invited to attend the king's bath was a sign of great intimacy and favor. A trusted advisor might sit on a stool beside the tub, discussing matters of state while the king soaked. It seems incredibly strange to us, the idea of a strategy meeting happening during bath time. But it speaks again to that lack of modern boundaries between the public and the private. When he was finished, he would be helped out of the tub and enveloped in large, sun-warmed linen towels. He would then be rubbed down with fragrant oils, perhaps almond oil infused with rose petals, to soften his skin and leave a lingering, pleasant scent. Finally, he would don a clean, loose linen robe and relax by the fire, feeling clean, warm, and refreshed. The whole process was a luxurious, multisensory ritual, a world away from the image of the unwashed medieval brute. But this fragrant scene of hygiene is only one side of the coin. The other side is the world of medieval medicine, a realm governed by the theory of the four humors, a system inherited from the ancient Greeks. This theory held that the body contained four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Perfect health was a state of perfect balance between these 4. Sickness was caused by an excess or deficiency of one or more of them. The entire practice of a royal physician was dedicated to identifying which humor was out of balance and then attempting to correct it. Let's imagine the king wakes up one morning feeling sluggish, feverish, and with a headache. The royal physician, a learned man who likely studied at a university in Padua or Paris, would be summoned. He would not ask for a blood test or an X-ray. He would begin by observing. He'd look at the king's complexion. Is it too red? That suggests an excess of blood, a sanguine imbalance. Is it pale and clammy? An excess of phlegm, a phlegmatic condition. He would also consult an astrological chart, as the positions of the planets were believed to influence the body's humors, and he would, without fail, examine the king's urine. Uroscopy was a cornerstone of medieval diagnosis. The physician would arrive with a special glass flask shaped like a bladder and a colored chart. The king's urine would be collected and held up to the light. The doctor would study its color, its clarity, its sediment, and even its smell and taste. Yes, taste. The chart would tell him what each variation meant. A pale, watery urine might signify an excess of phlegm, while a dark, reddish urine could point to an issue with blood or black bile. Let's say the physician, after consulting his charts and his flask, determines the king has an excess of blood. The prescribed treatment would be immediate and, to us, horrifying bloodletting. This was not some fringe quackery. It was the standard of care for centuries, practiced on everyone from the poorest peasant to the king himself. The belief was that by removing the excess blood, balance could be restored. There were two main ways to do this. The first was venesection, where a vein, usually in the arm, was opened with a small, sharp knife called a lancet. A specific amount of blood would be drained into a bowl, the quantity carefully measured. The physician would consult complex charts, showing which vein to open for which ailment. A headache might require bleeding from a vein in the forehead, while a liver problem would necessitate opening a vein in the right arm. The second, and perhaps more iconic, method was leeching. Leeches, a type of aquatic worm, were bred for medical purposes. The physician would apply a number of them to the king's skin. The leeches would attach themselves and begin to drink their fill of blood, becoming plump and swollen. It was considered a gentler, more localized form of bloodletting. Imagine the sight: the king, lying in his magnificent bed, with several dark, writhing leeches attached to his arms or temples, patiently drawing out the bad humor that was causing his illness. It's a deeply unsettling image, but for the people of the time, it was a sign that healing was taking place. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Diet was another key tool for rebalancing the humors. Foods were also classified by their humoral properties. A feverish, hot, and dry condition would be treated with cold and moist foods. So, our feverish king might be prescribed a diet of cucumbers, melon, and fish, while being told to avoid hot foods like pepper, garlic, and red meat. The entire royal kitchen could be turned on its head to accommodate the physician's prescriptions. What about dental care? There were no toothbrushes or fluoride toothpaste. Dental hygiene consisted of rubbing the teeth and gums with a rough linen cloth. To whiten the teeth and freshen the breath, various powders could be applied with the cloth. These might be made from powdered sage or, more alarmingly, from things like crushed bone, eggshells, or even a fine abrasive like soot. It was a battle against decay that was often lost. Toothaches were common, and the only real solution for a rotten tooth was extraction, performed by a barber surgeon with a terrifying-looking pair of forceps and no anesthetic beyond a strong shot of wine or brandy. We can only imagine the dread that a royal toothache could inspire. The fear of disease was ever present, but it wasn't a fear of germs, a concept that didn't exist. The prevailing theory of contagion was the miasma theory. It held that diseases, especially plagues, were caused by bad air, a poisonous vapor or mist that rose from swamps, rotting matter, or even from celestial events like the alignment of planets. The defense against miasma was smell. It was believed that if you could surround yourself with a powerful, pleasant scent, it would form a protective barrier against the deadly bad air. This is why the use of pomanders, strewing herbs, and burning incense was not just about luxury. It was a critical public health measure. During times of plague, a king's chambers would be kept filled with the smoke of aromatic woods, like juniper and rosemary. He would constantly carry his pomander, holding it to his nose when walking through crowded areas. Doctors wore beaked masks, stuffed with fragrant herbs, the iconic image of the plague doctor, in the belief that the perfumed air they were breathing was purified and safe. So the scent of lavender was not just a perfume, it was a shield. The scent of a leech was not a sign of horror, it was the smell of medicine. Let's consider the king's mental health. When a monarch suffered from what we would now diagnose as a mental illness, it was often interpreted through a spiritual or humoral lens. King Charles VI of France, who reigned in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, suffered from recurring bouts of psychosis. At times, he would not recognize his own wife and children. Famously, he developed the delusion that he was made of glass and would refuse to let people touch him for fear he might shatter. He would sometimes have iron rods sewn into his clothing to protect himself from breaking. The treatments prescribed were a desperate mix of prayer, astrology, and humoral medicine. Physicians tried to rebalance his humors with diets and purges. Sorcerers were brought in to see if he had been cursed. The entire court was thrown into chaos by the king's fragile mind, a situation made terrifying by the belief that the king's physical and mental health were mystically linked to the health of the kingdom itself. So we are left with this strange paradox. The king's world was one of incredible sensory richness, the fragrant steam of the bath, the sweet perfume of a rose oil massage. But it was also a world of profound physical vulnerability, where a common cold could lead to a debilitating bloodletting, a toothache to a brutal extraction, and a mental health crisis to treatments based on superstition and fear. The line between luxury and medicine was hopelessly blurred. The same herbs that scented his bath might be used in a bitter tonic to purge his humors. The same spices that graced his feast were prescribed as medicine. His life was a constant, fragrant, and often painful negotiation between pleasure and preservation. A daily ritual performed under the watchful and often misguided eyes of his physicians. The scent of lavender and the scent of leeches were two sides of the same royal coin. Having bathed and dined, let us now imagine the king has some hours of leisure. The great weight of state affairs, the petitions, the audiences, the council meetings is set aside for a time. What did a medieval king do for fun? His pastimes were not just idle distractions. They were extensions of his royal persona, activities that reinforced his status, honed his skills, and displayed his magnificence. Let us leave the close, scented air of the inner chambers and follow the king out into the crisp, open air of the hunt, and then back to the quiet, strategic hush of the fireside game. The hunt was, without question, the sport of kings. It was more than a sport. It was a social ritual, a military training exercise, and a powerful political statement all in one. The right to hunt in certain forests was a jealously guarded royal prerogative. To be invited on a royal hunt was a sign of immense favor, a chance to spend informal time with the monarch in a dynamic and exciting setting. Imagine the morning of the hunt. A special kind of energy fills the castle courtyard. The air is cool and sharp, holding the scent of damp earth and horses. There is a sense of controlled chaos. Dozens of horses, saddled and ready, snort and stamp, their breath pluming in the chill. Grooms in leather jerkins move among them, checking girths and bridles. But the most prominent sound is the baying and whining of the dogs. A medieval royal hunt was a canine symphony. There were different dogs for every purpose. There were the limers, large hounds handled on a leash by a huntsman, used to find the trail of a deer or boar. There were the roches, or running hounds, a pack of fast, energetic dogs that would chase the quarry once it was found. And there, in a corner, held by their own keepers, might be the great, powerful wolfhounds or boarhounds, bred for their strength and courage to bring the dangerous prey to bay. The noise, the smell, the sheer animal energy is electric. The king emerges, not in his heavy velvet robes, but in practical, yet still regal, hunting attire. He would wear sturdy leather boots, woolen or leather breeches, and a doublet of a practical color, like green or brown, the traditional hunting colors. The fabric would still be of high quality, perhaps a fine wool, and it might be subtly embroidered with his crest. He carries a special hunting horn made of silver or ivory, which he uses to send signals to the other hunters. He mounts his favorite horse, his palfrey, a strong, spirited animal. The entire hunting party, a long train of nobles, knights, ladies who often rode astride like men, and a small army of professional huntsmen, kennel masters, and servants, clatters out of the castle gate and heads for the royal forest. Once in the woods, a quiet intensity takes over. The professional huntsman, who knew this forest intimately, would have been out since dawn, tracking their prey, usually a stagga, mature male, red deer. The harboring of a great stag was a skill in itself. The huntsman would report back to the king, describing the animal by the size of its hoofprints, the slot, and the nature of its droppings. A stag with a large number of tines or points on its antlers was a particularly prized quarry. When the stag is located, the hunt begins in earnest. The limer is let loose, and the chase is on. The king and his nobles follow, galloping through the forest, navigating trees and streams, the sound of the hunting horns echoing through the woods. It was a thrilling, dangerous, and physically demanding pursuit that could last for hours and cover many miles. It was the perfect training for warfare. It required excellent horsemanship, courage, and the ability to react quickly in a chaotic environment. When the hounds finally cornered the stag, bringing it to bay, the climax of the hunt arrives. It was the king's privilege to perform the quarry, the ceremonial killing of the animal. He would dismount and, using a special hunting sword or a spear, dispatch the exhausted and cornered stag. It was a moment of high drama and ritual. Afterward, the stag would be butchered on the spot in a precise, almost surgical manner known as the breaking. Specific cuts of meat were reserved for the king, others for the favored nobles, and even the hounds received their own special share, the curie, as a reward. Nothing was wasted, but not all hunting was about chasing large animals on horseback. There was a quieter, more elegant, and arguably more skillful pastime, falconry. This was the art of hunting with trained birds of prey, and it was a passion. For many medieval nobles, both men and women, a king would have a royal mews, a dedicated building where his collection of prized hawks and falcons was housed. The master of the mews was another important household official, a man of great skill and patience, Sing Sing. The birds sit on their perches, tethered by soft leather straps called jesses. They are magnificent creatures, but the most prized bird for a king would be the gerfalcon, a large, powerful falcon from the Arctic, often pure white. To own a gerfalcon was the ultimate status symbol, as they were incredibly rare and difficult to obtain, often given as diplomatic gifts between monarchs. The king might decide to spend an afternoon flying his favorite falcon. The bird is hooded with a small, ornate leather cap that covers its eyes, keeping it calm. The king feels the surprising weight of the bird, the firm grip of its talons on the glove. He walks out into an open field near the castle. The falconer unhoods the bird. It blinks, its sharp, intelligent eyes taking in the world. A servant might release a pigeon or another bird. The king casts his falcon into the air with a flick of his wrist. The bird rises into the sky, circling, gaining height. Then it spots its prey. It tucks its wings and plunges into a stoop, a breathtakingly fast dive. The air whistles through its feathers. There is a small puff of feathers in the distance as it strikes its quarry. The king would then ride over to retrieve his bird and its prize. Falconry was a subtle, complex art. It required a deep bond of trust and understanding between the falconer and the bird. It was a game of skill, patience, and partnership with a wild creature. It was seen as a noble and intellectual pursuit, a counterpoint to the raw, brutal energy of the stag hunt. Now, let us imagine the day is drawing to a close. The hunters have returned, tired but exhilarated. The evening meal has been eaten. The great hall is quieting down. The king retires to his solar, his private living room. It's a smaller, more intimate space than the great hall, with a comfortable fireplace, chairs a luxury, as most people sat on benches or stools, and perhaps a small collection of books here by the crackling fire. The king might indulge in another favorite pastime, chess. The game, which originated in India and came to Europe via Persia and the Arab world, was immensely popular among the nobility. It was called the King of Games and the Game of Kings. It was seen as the perfect intellectual exercise, a simulation of warfare that taught strategy, foresight, and patience. A royal chess set was a work of art. The board might be made of inlaid woods, or even of silver and gold. The pieces were not the abstract Staunton design we know today. They were small, intricate sculptures, often carved from walrus ivory or bone. The king was a recognizable monarch, the queen a noble lady, the bishops wore mitres, the knights were on horseback, and the rooks were often depicted as chariots or castle towers. The most famous surviving set, the Lewis chessman, discovered in Scotland, shows this incredible artistry, with each piece having its own personality and expression. Imagine the king sitting across the board from a trusted advisor or a visiting noble. The only sounds are the crackle of the fire, the soft click of the ivory pieces on the board, and the low murmur of their voices as they discuss their moves. The game is slow, deliberate. Each move is considered, each potential consequence weighed. The king might stroke his chin, his eyes focused on the board, planning his attack several moves ahead. It is a quiet, intense battle of wits, a world away from the noise and chaos of the hunt. In this small, contained world of 64 squares, he is in absolute control, a commander moving his forces, testing his strategies, and if he was not in the mood for the intellectual rigor of chess, he might have other pets besides his hawks and hounds. Small dogs, lapdogs, were popular with both male and female nobles. They were companions, little furry hot water bottles for a cold castle. Sometimes more exotic pets were kept. King Henry III of England was famously given a white bear, a polar bear by the King of Norway in 1252, which he kept at the Tower of London and allowed to go fishing for its own supper in the River Thames on a long chain, kept for amusement. So the king's leisure was a rich and varied tapestry. It could be the high-adrenaline, high-stakes drama of the hunt, a public display of martial prowess. It could be the quiet, artistic partnership of falconry, a demonstration of patience and skill. Or it could be the silent intellectual warfare of a chess game by the fire. Each activity, in its own way, reflected and reinforced what it meant to be a king, a master of the wild, a partner to noble creatures, and a brilliant strategist, whether on the field of battle or on a board of ivory and wood. And as the last chess piece is moved, and the king gets ready for bed, he is not just a ruler, but a man who has lived a full and varied day, his mind and body exercised by the unique and powerful pastimes of his age. Let us take a step back. We have followed the king through his day, from the waking ritual to the evening game of chess. But in focusing so tightly on the monarch himself, we risk missing the single most pervasive and defining habit of his home life: the complete and utter lack of silence and solitude. The king's home, the castle, was not a tranquil retreat. It was a living, breathing, and constantly humming organism, a small, densely populated city, and its constant, low-level thrum of activity was the unending soundtrack to the king's existence. Imagine standing in the middle of the castle's main courtyard, the bailey, and just listening. This is the central nervous system of the entire operation, and it is never truly quiet. The first sound you might notice is the ring of a blacksmith's hammer from a smoky, open-fronted forge tucked into the curtain wall. The castle blacksmith and his apprentices are at work. The rhythmic clankling of hammer on hot iron is a constant, percussive beat. They are not forging great swords for battle every day. They are doing the mundane, vital work of survival. They are sharpening plowshares for the castles, farms, repairing iron cookpots from the kitchen, forging new hinges for a heavy oak door, and, most importantly, making and fitting horseshoes for the dozens of horses housed in the stables. The air around the forge smells of hot metal, coal smoke, and the sharp, acrid scent of a sizzling horse's hoof as a new shoe is fitted. From another direction comes a different set of sounds. The stables. Here is the soft nickering of horses, the rustle of straw as grooms muck out the stalls, the jingle of harness, and the steady, rhythmic sound of a horse chewing its oats. The smell is rich and earthy, a potent combination of horse, hay, and leather. The master of the horse is a high-ranking official responsible for this critical military and transportation asset. He oversees an entire department of grooms, farriers, and stable boys. Now, turn your attention to the kitchens. This is another hub of constant, frantic activity, especially in the hours leading up to a meal. The royal kitchens were often in a separate building to reduce the risk of a catastrophic fire. As you approach, the heat and noise intensify. You hear the frantic chopping of vegetables, the pounding of meat with a mallet, the sizzle of fat in a pan, and the shouts of the master cook, a temperamental artist ruling over his domain. The air is thick with a kaleidoscope of smells, baking bread from the massive beehive ovens, roasting meat from the huge fireplaces where whole animals turn on a spit, often turned by a small boy, a spitjack, in a hot and miserable job. The sharp Thames of vinegar, the sweet scent of simmering fruit, and the ever-present smell of wood smoke. It is a hot, steamy, and chaotic world, a factory dedicated to fueling the great machine of the court, and people are everywhere. The bailey is not an empty space, it is a highway. Servants scurry back and forth, carrying buckets of water from the well, bundles of firewood, baskets of laundry. A cart drawn by a lumbering ox rumbles over the cobblestones, bringing in a load of flour from the castle's mill. A group of soldiers, off duty, are practicing their swordplay in a corner, the scrape and ring of their blades adding to the din. A group of petitioners, humble tenants from a nearby village, huddle near the entrance to the great hall, hoping for a moment of the king's steward's time to plead a case about a disputed boundary or an unfair tax. Asterisk, asterisk. Children are underfoot, the sons and daughters of knights and high-ranking servants who live within the castle walls. Their laughter and shouts echo off the stone. And then there are the animals, not just the horses and the hounds, but chickens, pecking in the dirt, a pig that has escaped its sty, rooting around for scraps, and the castle cats, sleek and watchful, keeping the rodent population in check. The entire place is teeming with life, a vibrant, noisy, and somewhat messy ecosystem. Now let's move inside, into the great hall. Even when it's not mealtime, it's rarely empty. It is the default public space, the castle's living room. A group of clerks might be working at a trestle table, scratching away with quill pens on parchment, drafting official documents. Their work is accompanied by the dry scrape of the quill and the occasional rustle of a turning page. In another corner, a group of courtiers are gambling, playing dice on an upturned barrel, their low curses and cheers punctuating the air. A page, a young boy in training to be a knight, is being drilled on his etiquette by a stern household official. The minstrels in their gallery might be practicing a new song, the gentle plucking of a lute providing a soft musical backdrop. The hum is constant. Even the king's most private moments are part of this hum. When the king moved from one part of the castle to another, it was not a simple walk down the hall. It was a procession. He would be preceded by an usher with a staff of office, clearing the way, and followed by a retinue of his bodyguards, advisors, and whatever favor-seekers could manage to attach themselves to his orbit. His movement was a wave that rippled through the castle. People would stop what they were doing, bow or curtsy, and watch as the center of their world passed by. There was no nipping out for a quiet walk. This constant presence of other people was a fundamental aspect of kingship. A king who spent too much time alone was seen as melancholic, secretive, and potentially plotting something. A good king was a public king, accessible to his people, at least his important people. His power was, in part, performative, and a performance needs an audience. The nobles and courtiers who lived at the castle were this permanent audience. They were not just there for decoration. They were the gears of government, the Lord Chancellor, the Lord Treasurer, the keeper of the Privy Seal. These were the king's ministers, and they and their staffs all operated out of the castle. The king's home was also the nation's central administrative headquarters. Let's consider the sound of the chapel. Several times a day, the tolling of a bell would cut through the general hum, calling the household to prayer. The king and his court would process to the castle chapel for mass. Inside, the soundscape would change. The chaotic hum of the bailey would be replaced by the soaring notes of a choir singing plain songs, the drone of the priest's Latin liturgy, and the echo of 100 voices reciting prayers. It was a different kind of sound, but it was not silence. It was a structured, holy sound, a collective voice that bound the household together in shared faith. And what about the night? Surely, the castle must have fallen silent then. But even in the deepest night, the hum never completely disappeared. The guards on the walls called out the hours, their voices carrying across the sleeping courtyards. A baby might cry in the servants' quarters. The hounds in the kennels might be set off barking by a fox. The embers in the great hall hearth would crackle and shift. And inside the king's own chamber, as we know, the soft breathing of the grooms on the floor provided a constant, living presence. The closest a king might get to true quiet would be in the castle library or scriptorium, if he was a learned king who valued books. Here, silence was a rule. The only sounds would be the whisper of turning parchment pages, the scratch of a quill, and the soft light of a candle. Books were incredibly precious, each one copied by hand, a process that could take months. A library was a vault of treasure. To sit in a room surrounded by these silent, sleeping stories would be a profound retreat from the noise of the court. But this was an escape available only to a literate few. For most, the constant hum was life itself. It was the sound of security, of community, of a world that was functioning as it should. A silent castle would have been a terrifying thing. It would mean something was deeply wrong, an attack, a plague, the death of the king. The noise was a sign of health. This habit of living in a perpetual crowd, of having every meal, every walk, every waking and sleeping moment observed, is perhaps the single oddest habit to our modern minds, which so value privacy. A medieval king had no real concept of privacy as we would understand it. His body was not his own. It was a symbol of the state. His time was not his own. It belonged to the realm. His home was not a home. It was a stage. So when we imagine the king let's not picture him in a silent, empty throne room. Let's picture him at the very center of a whirlwind of activity. Let's hear the blacksmith's hammer, the cook's shout, the courtiers laugh, the dogs bark, the priests chant, and the petitioners murmur. This is the castle's constant hum, the symphony of medieval life. And the king, whether he liked it or not, was its conductor and its prisoner, forever living within the sound of his own magnificent, chaotic, and deeply public home. The day is done. The hunt is over. The feast consumed. The games of chess played out. The sun has long since set, and a deep, profound darkness has fallen over the land. A darkness far more complete than any we experience in our electrically lit world. The castle, which hummed with so much life during the day, now begins to settle into a different rhythm, a slower, softer cadence for the night. And for the king, the final ritual of the day is about to begin, the ceremony of going to bed. Let us follow him as he leaves the solar, his private sitting room, and makes his way back towards the bedchamber. The procession is smaller now, more intimate. The great crowds of courtiers have dispersed to their own lodgings. Only his most trusted attendants and bodyguards accompany him through the now shadowy corridors. The tapestries on the walls seem darker, their woven figures lost in the gloom. The main source of light comes from a servant walking ahead, holding a candelabra with several beeswax candles. Their light is soft and golden, casting long, dancing shadows that leap and twist as they move. The air is cool and still, carrying the scent of snuffed-out rushlights and cooling stone. They arrive at the door to his bedchamber. The guards take up their positions outside. The king enters, and the room is much as we first found it, but prepared for the night. The fire in the hearth has been built up, casting a warm, flickering glow across the room. The heavy bed curtains are drawn back, revealing the bed, which has been opened by the grooms. The fur coverlets and woolen blankets are turned down invitingly, and the linen sheets look cool and white in the firelight. A key part of the bedtime ritual for a king was the voidie, or the void. This was a final light refreshment taken just before sleep. It wasn't a meal, but a small ceremonial snack intended to settle the stomach and aid digestion through the night. A small table would be set up near the fire, covered with a clean linen cloth. On it, a servant would place a silver platter with comfit-sugared spices like aniseed or coriander, thought to be good for the digestion, and perhaps some candied fruit. But the most important part of the void was the drink. This was typically a posset, a soothing, warm beverage made of milk curdled with wine or ale and sweetened with sugar and spices like nutmeg and cinnamon. It was a sort of medieval sleep tonic, the equivalent of a cup of warm milk or chamomile tea. The king would be served his posset in a special two-handled silver cup. Imagine him sitting in a heavy wooden chair by the fire, wrapped in a warm dressing gown of fur-lined silk. He sips the warm, sweet, spicy liquid. The warmth spreads through his chest, a comforting, sleepy feeling. It's a moment of quiet contemplation, the last taste of the day. While he drinks his posset, the grooms of the chamber are making their final preparations. One of them might use a warming pan. This was a brass or copper pan with a long handle and a hinged lid. It would be filled with hot embers from the fire, and then the sealed pan would be slid between the linen sheets of the bed. warming them through so the king wouldn't have to endure the shock of cold linen on his skin. It was a simple but profound luxury, a small bubble of warmth in a cold world. The groom of the stool is there, of course, ready to assist the king one last time with the commode before he gets into bed. This final check-in was also a moment for a last private word, a final instruction for the morning, a quiet confidence shared only between the king and his most trusted servant. Then comes the undressing. The heavy rings are slid from his fingers and placed in a jeweled casket. The golden chain is lifted from his neck. The fine doublet and robes are removed to be taken away by the wardrobe servants for brushing and storage. He is divested of the layers of majesty, piece by piece, until he stands once more in a simple linen nightshirt, the same garment he wore upon waking. He is no longer the glittering icon from the great hall. He is a man preparing for the vulnerability of sleep. Asterisk, asterisk. Before getting into bed, he would kneel on a cushioned prie-dieu, a prayer stool, which would be placed near his bedside. Religion was woven into the very fabric of daily life, and the final act of the day was to commend one's soul to God. The king's chaplain might be present to lead him in his evening prayers, or he might say them alone, a quiet murmur in the firelit room. He would pray for his own soul, for his family, for the safety of his kingdom, and for protection against the evils of the night, both physical and spiritual. Nightmares were not just bad dreams. They were seen as potential demonic assaults or troubling visions from God. Prayer was a spiritual shield. Finally, he is ready for sleep. He walks to the monumental bed and, with the help of a groom, climbs in. He sinks into the deep feather mattress, the linen sheets now pleasantly warm from the warming pan. The grooms cover him with the layers of blankets and the heavy fur coverlet, tucking him in securely. The weight is immense, comforting, and immobilizing. The groom of the stool then draws the heavy velvet bed curtains, one by one, until the king is enclosed in his own private, dark, warm tent. From inside, the sounds of the room are muffled. The crackle of the fire is softer, the murmur of the grooms more distant. The light of the fire is reduced to a faint, rosy glow that seeps through the thick fabric. The last rituals of the room now take place outside the bed. The chaplain, if he was present, departs with a final blessing. The servant removes the posset cup and the remnants of the void. Most of the candles are extinguished, plunging the room into a deep, velvety darkness, punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic light of the fire and the single watch candle left burning in a safe place through the night. The grooms, who are to sleep in the chamber, settle down on their pallets on the floor. Their job is not over. They are on watch. Their sleep is light, their senses attuned to any sound from the royal bed. They are the king's human defense system. The last sounds the king hears as he drifts off to sleep are not of silence, but of this managed quiet, the gentle crackle of the log on the fire, the whisper of the wind at the window, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the trusted men sleeping just a few feet away from him. And in the darkness of his curtained world, what does a king dream of? Does he dream of the stag he chased through the forest, its antlers like the branches of a winter tree? Does he see the patterns of the chessboard, the ivory king checkmated by a cunning bishop? Does he taste the spices of the feast, or feel the weight of the crown on his head? Or does he, like any other man, dream of things lost, of fears, of strange and nonsensical landscapes. His sleep is precious, not just for his own health, but for the health of the realm. A well-rested king is a clear-headed king. A king plagued by nightmares might make rash decisions, seeing ill omens in his dreams. His sleep is a state resource, guarded as carefully as the crown jewels. And so, the last candle flickers. The castle settles into its deepest slumber. The guards pace the battlements, their shapes dark against the star-dusted sky. The great hall is a cavern of shadows. The kitchens are cold and silent. And in the heart of it all, inside a fortress of oak and velvet, surrounded by the quiet breathing of his loyal servants, the king sleeps. The oddest of all his habits, perhaps, is this final surrender, the daily act of laying down the immense burden of power and trusting the darkness, trusting the men on the floor, and trusting that the sun and his kingdom will still be there when he wakes. And as the fire burns low, casting one last sleepy orange glow on the woven face of a unicorn in the tapestry, the king drifts deeper into the one realm where he is truly and completely alone. May these memories of a world long past guide you now into your own peaceful dreams. Let the distant echo of a castle at rest soothe your mind. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to see. There is only the quiet of the night and the gentle pull of sleep. If you drifted off somewhere along our journey tonight, I hope it was a pleasant passage. Feel free to let me know in the comments below when you find your way back to the waking world. Until next time, sweet dreams. Boring history for sleep.